This is the voiceover presentation for Chapter 3 in the Rothermel textbook, External Analysis. In this presentation, we'll cover the PESTEL 5 forces models and discuss market dynamics when firms consider expanding into additional industries. The intention is to have a very good understanding of how external factors impact firm performance, particularly as those external factors influence a firm's strategic position. Broadly speaking, firms operate in two external environments. First, they exist in societies just like any other type of organization and are influenced by other major forces in our world such as political activities, economic dynamics, social trends, and technological change. Second, firms participate within industries or groups of companies that are distinct from others. The two environments share one important similarity. They both can influence a firm's performance that are largely beyond managerial control. As such, analysis of the general and industry environments center on understanding their structural elements so that managers can properly position their firms within those environments. More favorable positions give firms the best chance to succeed in competitive environments, even if the external factors can't be controlled. The PESTEL framework, an acronym for political, economic, social, technological, ecological, and legal, is a good starting point for analysis of the general environment. It helps managers keep in mind the wide variety of factors that can influence business decisions and the results that they produce. For details on the definition of each, please refer to the textbook. A couple of thoughts here on how to use the PESTEL framework. First, notice that the PESTEL can be thought of as describing the environments for business activities in a particular country. That is, the United States has a political system that is distinct from the political systems of other countries. Think of the PESTEL as a country-by-country framework. Second, because the PESTEL is so broad and encompassing, the elements in the PESTEL can intersect with firm and industry-specific attributes in a way that can confuse what should be considered as part of the PESTEL analysis and what should be considered in other forms of strategic analysis. For example, the existence of social media would be a PESTEL factor for firms that are not in a tech industry, say a mining company or an engineering firm, but would be subject to company-specific analyses for a firm like Instagram. Be sure to think through how you treat factors in the external environment. If a firm can control the element or if it's an important part of their strategies, it is not PESTEL for that firm or industry. In a similar vein, the elements of the PESTEL can vary in how pertinent they are to a firm's performance. For instance, that mining firm is certainly going to pay attention to ecological and political trends much more than it will to socio-cultural trends. Last, as already mentioned, these factors are rarely manipulable. They are too broad for any firm or even any industry group to impact in a meaningful way. However, firms can do their best to craft strategic responses to them that generate the greatest possible advantages. We'll now move to industry analysis. Let's start with a reminder of the definition of the term industry. An industry is a group of firms that offer common products or services and or satisfy similar customer wants or needs and or serve the same markets. How a firm defines its industry or its primary competitors will dictate how it approaches competition. As an example of the different ways that a firm can define industry, take a look at Exhibit 3.8 in the text. Notice that the airline industry could be broadly defined to include all of the firms represented on this graphic. Every firm in the exhibit offers air service to travelers. However, the industry can also be broken up into smaller groups by the business model, low-cost point-to-point versus differentiated hub and spoke. As such, what was one industry grouping became two industry groupings. Either way is legitimate. However, the strategic analysis arising from the two different approaches would be quite distinct. Good industry analysis depends on being very clear about the group of companies being included in the industry. Once we have defined the industry, we can add some details to it. Industry fundamentals include straightforward elements such as the delineation of the products and services that the firms sell, the size and growth of the industry as a whole, typically described as the summed revenues of all the firms in the industry and how those revenues are changing over time, and the average profitability levels of those firms. Market structure describes how firms interact with one another. Three basic elements of market structure are fragmentation, or the degree to which market share is divided up among many firms, or if a limited number of powerful firms dominate the industry. The industry's diversity, or the degree of similarity or dissimilarity of the products, services, and business activities of the firms in the industry. And dispersion, which observes if firms are clustered together or spread across geographies. Dynamism observes the rate of change in an industry, including its position in a life cycle, the amount of innovation occurring by its firms, and the possibility of competitive or product disruptions. The most enduring framework for the nuts and bolts of industry analysis is Porter's Five Forces model. A little bit of background is important here. Michael Porter was trained as an industrial organization economist, which means he was an economist who studied how industries worked. He had noticed that some industries earn consistently above average or below average rates of return on investments. For instance, the average profitability of the pharmaceutical industry tends to be much higher than most others. By standard economic theory, those differentials should not have persisted over time. If capital providers know that investments into certain industries earn more than others, they should invest more of their dollars into those higher performing industries and move dollars away from investments in the lower performing industries. That would effectively cause both sets of returns to come back to some sort of average. Porter's response to this puzzle was the Five Forces model. The forces in this model are structural characteristics of an industry that make its returns sticky, or prone to remain consistently high or consistently low over time. The five forces are the rivalry among competitors, the threat of potential entrants, the presence of substitutes, and the bargaining power of both buyers and suppliers. It is important to keep in mind that the Five Forces model is an economics tool. Its specific purpose is to understand those structural forces underlying an industry's average rate of return. While understanding industry dynamics is incredibly important, strategic decisions, on the other hand, focus on how to engage with those competitive frameworks, not the structural forces themselves. So let's go through each of the five forces, starting with the box in the middle, rivals. Consider this box to be the equivalent of an industry definition. It encompasses all of the firms in an industry, however that industry is defined. For instance, a broad definition of an auto dealership industry might include all auto dealers in the state of Georgia, while a tighter definition may only include auto dealers in the Kennesaw area. Both would be legitimate definitions, but would result in very different industry analyses. Industries with higher levels of rivalry will have lower average rates of profitability than industries in which competition among incumbents is less intense. The more firms in an industry have to compete head-to-head or based on price, and the more similar are their products and services, the greater the rivalry and the lower the industry profitability. Additionally, remember that industries can be comprised of firms that are fragmented, diverse, and dispersed. So that segmentation within markets also impacts the nature of competition. For instance, Kia, BMW, and Maserati may all be car companies, but they focus on very different segments of the market. In all, companies that compete directly in the same markets for the same customers with the exact same products and services will have a greater influence on each other's profitability than more distant competitors. Interactions between the buyers of and suppliers to an industry are based on bargaining power, or the power to determine the terms of business between the groups. Industries that work with more powerful buyers and suppliers will have lower levels of profitability. Again, we have to recognize that there are nuances within these groups. An industry's participants might sell products and services to lots of different buyers and purchase goods from many different types of suppliers. This means that the single boxes, as represented on this chart, for buyers and suppliers really represent a variety of actors, each of which may have different levels of bargaining power. Potential entrants and substitutes are similar in that they both focus on groups of companies that provide alternatives to the current incumbents in the industry, but they operate in very different ways. Potential entrants are companies that would enter an industry by selling the same products or services as the current industry competitors. The influence of potential entrants is based on two factors: barriers to entry and threat of retaliation. Barrier to entry are simply the costs associated of getting into an industry, such as the cost to achieve production scale or the cost to build customer relationships and brand names. Potential retaliation occurs when the incumbents of an industry try to fight off new entrants by attacking their business model. For example, if a new airline tried to establish a foothold in the Atlanta market, we can be nearly certain that both Delta and Southwest Airlines would immediately drop their fares to whatever cities the new airline hoped to serve. If the potential entrant knows that it will be challenged, it might be dissuaded from trying to enter the market in the first place. The key point here with potential entrants, recall that they sell the same products and services as the industry incumbents. Substitutes, on the other hand, are defined as companies that sell different products or services, but that serve the same customer need or want. For instance, plastic bottles, glass bottles, and aluminum cans can all hold soft drinks, but there are very different products made with different materials through different processes, even as they serve the same purpose, packaging a soft drink. As such, they are substitutes for one another, different products or services that serve a like function. Like potential entrants, greater challenges from substitutes are associated with a lower level of industry profitability. The last things to mention here are governments and complementers, which could be additional structural forces that are important in some industries. Governments have actually been called the sixth force for some industries, where governmental policies and regulations can significantly impact strategic decisions and firm performance, such as industries like healthcare and utilities. Complementers are companies that help make an industry's products or services stronger or more valuable. For instance, markets for things like really cool TVs, home theater sound systems, and video streaming services mutually influence each other's profitability, even though they are in different industries, because developments in one can cause customers to make buying decisions in the others. To summarize this long discussion of the five forces model, all of this material focuses on understanding why some industries are more profitable than others, and the factors that cause those returns to be sticky over time. Notice that all we're talking about here is industries, not how individual companies operate within them. To do that, we move on to understanding how managers can use the five forces model to make good strategic positioning decisions. Strategic positions determine how a firm will engage with its competitive environments through choices on things like product and service portfolios and selection of market channels. The goal of this analysis is to describe clear, definitive positions that will allow a firm to be profitable over the long term. Said another way, the five forces model provides the settings for how firms will go to market and establish their own identities in these competitive spaces. For example, consider the industry of selling shoes. The four firms here are all part of that same industry, so they could have drawn up the same five forces analysis, but they have derived very different strategic positions from it. Each of them is a viable means to compete in the industry. That is, there's never just one best strategic position that will fall out of a five forces analysis. Each firm can craft its own way to compete. Just to belabor the point, the five forces model focuses on understanding dynamics that impact all firms in an industry. Therefore, it's not appropriate in the five forces model to discuss the power of buyers in the context of a single firm. The power of buyers is the same for all firms in that industry grouping, however it's been defined. However, each firm in the given industry can respond to the five forces in its own way. The positioning decisions are the result of strategizing after getting a deep understanding of industry pressures and dynamics from the five forces model. This is where firms create separation from their competitors. One last point here. Just about every industry is a single step in a long system of activities that turns raw materials or basic human expertise into products and services that are consumed by customers. Each one of those steps could be called an industry on its own. And we can describe those interactions in terms of the five forces model by noting that industries overlap with one another. In this perspective, the suppliers and buyers of an industry in the center really represent industries of their own. The suppliers of the original industry simply view that industry as their buyers, and the industry's buyers consider it as part of their supply chain. In other words, the industries are part of an overall value system. Let's move to external analysis when a firm wants to grow into a new market. There are two ways that firms do so: through moves into adjacent markets or by making big moves that disrupt the basis of competition in an industry, as discussed on the next two slides. The basis for either of these moves are the questions described in this graphic from the text. Expanding the scope of a business is risky. Essentially, it involves dedicating resources in a way that enlarges a firm's business definition and changes its industry competition. These types of ventures require a great deal of confidence when answering the how, what, where, who, and when questions about market entry. Market entry through adjacencies involves a gradual expansion of a firm's business definition. A great example of successful agency moves comes from Nike. The firm is now a behemoth, but it started as a simple importer of track shoes. It took several years before it introduced its now historic waffle pattern track shoes, and it then progressed into offering shoes for other sports and adding clothing, equipment, and retail locations over time. And the moves listed here are just a sample of its amazing growth pattern over time. Nike essentially grew into the company it is today through a long series of baby steps. Other firms make a bigger splash by introducing products or services that significantly disrupt the traditional ways that an industry operates. Take Airbnb and TikTok as examples. The technologies these firms develop completely change the basis of competition in the hotel and social media industries, generating a great deal of success for themselves and a scramble to respond on the part of their competitors. To conclude this presentation, the environments in which business take place have a significant influence on strategic decisions and the performance that results from them. As such, firms must be keenly aware of the factors that are outside their boundaries and therefore not subject to their control. This presentation covers two important models for external analysis. The PESTEL provides a sense of the broad environments that provide conditions for all firms and industries in a country. From this model, managers should focus on factors that will have the most potential impact on a firm's performance. The Five Forces model is foundational to the study of strategy. It is a tool for understanding industry conditions and leads to decisions about strategic positioning. Last, firms often pursue growth through moves that bring them into new industries or by introducing new ways of doing business that disrupt an industry. While risky, these moves can lead to strong performance if successful. And that concludes this presentation.